Yeah.
That's a whole nother.
There you go. You did it. Good job. Hi. Okay, we're good.
Okay, for anybody who didn't pick this up already, this is a copy of what you guys signed last week and picked up on a break. They're right here.
What's your name? You probably should be there.
Who?
So is that why
Oh,
we
okay.
passed the bond?
Ivy's not here, she'll get hers. No, I don't, no, don't take her.
Please don't be able to communicate with my daughter-in-law
I'm gonna go pack up my stuff and then I'll come back and get this stuff and then I'm out. You have your keys if I close the big door?
Yes, ma'am. Your mother's all right. How was the other night? Was it what you expected it to be? Better or worse?
Yes, no problem.
Okay. What I like to do at the beginning of each class, especially when we got people that are kind of straggling in because of work or whatever the case may be, I would like to take 5 minutes or so and give you a chance to ask questions. It can be a question at the end of one of the chapters. It can be anything that we talked about from now on back. So obviously that list of things you can ask questions about gets longer every night. And as I said before, during the time that we're talking about this stuff, if you have a question, ask it. If I feel it's not appropriate at that point, I'll tell you so. All I ask for you is, if I tell you that you back off, and I'll get to it later. Either I'm gonna talk about it 5 minutes from now, or 3 classes from now, or we'll talk about it on a break. Because certain things, if they don't fit with what you're talking about, they destroy the discussion of what, at that point, we're trying to understand. But it does make sense that all this stuff kind of blends together. Except the first 7 chapters. First 7 chapters are Mom. If you're waiting for Mom to make sense, you'll be waiting a long time. Or you can find yourself on your posterior. In real estate language, that's called revocation.
Oh, what?
Revocation, which translates to find another job. Does anybody have any questions before we start?
Just get this paper. Early, you're done?
No, I read it.
Okay. Just give it to Dale when you're done, okay?
Okay.
Just put that on my desk, please.
Yeah.
Bye, guys. Bye, guys.
Yes, she did. Actually, yes,
Are we going to go into another section of appraisals? Because,
yeah, whole chapter.
okay, because it's contradictory now, and it says that there's gonna be exceptions later.
Mhm.
And then like one of the practice questions, I was like, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, which question?
It was number 3, because they threw in the language
Whoa,
of non,
whoa.
sorry,
Oh,
page
Uh,
13,
thank you. Question?
number 3.
Okay.
So I originally chose D, because don't do an appraisal unless you're licensed. But then I didn't catch that they said non-federally, so if it's non-federal, then yes, you can.
Right, you got it.
Okay. but I still like, even reading it over, it's like, you can, but then you can't, but yeah, you can, and you have to follow the rules.
What you can,
Yeah,
and what part of the rules told you that you could in that answer? That was non-federally rated.
right,
If it had been federally, that answer would have been wrong.
right.
Yes, a half a word can change the difference between a 74 and a 75. And if you aren't a good reader, you better practice. Because that's the type of shit that'll get you. So you really have to pay attention to the way they word things. I have the tendency to wander, because I deal with so much material. I have a tendency to wander sometimes and not see every word. Well, you know, like and you, those of you that spend your life on Facebook, you do not read. You scan. And that's fine when you're in Facebook. That is a bitch if you're taking a test. Because she got it wrong because she missed a word. She didn't miss a word. She missed half a word. Not even really half a word, about a third of the word. If you are the type of person who reads a lot, you don't read, as I just said. I don't care what it is, you don't read, you scan. That is dangerous. How do I control that? Take a pen, take your finger, and go across the page. That way you won't miss this type of stuff. So that type of stuff is not a lack of knowledge. It's a mechanical problem. And if you find you're having that kind of problem, that you're misreading questions or you're not picking up on words that are really the key to why that answer is, let's talk. That's why I also suggested in the back of the other textbook, by the way, the exam manual, you don't need to bring until I tell you to. That's to prepare you for the state exam. So we'll get into that as time goes along. You okay now?
Yeah, that was my only question. I mean, and if we're going to go more in depth in appraisals, I'm sure it'll
Yeah.
become clearer.
That's why I kind of, it's better to talk about it when you've got all the information rather than, because you realize chapter one's kind of a overview, kind of set up where you're going with all this. And that's why I kind of try to kind of cruise through it. Does anybody have any other questions before we move on? Earl, I suggest that you grab somebody's book on a break, because I will tell you to put brackets in things. I'll tell you to highlight things, so you wouldn't get a highlighter if you don't have one. Right. And when I tell you to make a star beside of that information, the star means that it's information on the class exam.
Okay.
Now, I had a student in the other class who unfortunately did not pass. And she says, can I see my exam to see what I got wrong? My answer was, no. And my answer will always be, no. Why? Because the 100 questions on the class exam, none of those may be on the state exam. They only have significance because those are the areas of material that this particular test is attacking. But they have a bank of probably 35 or 4,000 questions. What's better is they may have 2 or 3 sets of answers to go with those questions. So if you're thinking that you need to memorize all these questions, Number one, you're gonna need therapy if you try to do that. And number two is you're gonna fail the test, which means you really need therapy then. Concept, people, not questions. Understand the concept. If you participate in class like you did the other night, which was really good, and I was very pleased, that's where the difference is gonna be made. Because you will notice that I throw a lot of scenarios and situations at you. Things you won't see on the class exam, but you will see on the state exam. Because those questions are to see if you really understand what you've been taught. The only way we can determine that is as I ask questions, you answer. Whether it's right or whether it's wrong is irrelevant. I am not going to get upset with you if you get it wrong. I'm going to get upset with you if you don't answer at all. Because you know what? If you leave it blank, it's already wrong. Anybody else got a question? I'm going to 2. Okay, chapter 2, page 18. I'm sorry, 16. I have a doctor's appointment next week. Actually, no, 14 around here.
You should be on 18.
I know. I appreciate the fact that you know where I am. So I probably don't need too much guidance. But I will ask you every night, where are we? Because you realize I do real estate more than, 8 or 9 or 10 hours a day. So remembering, and I don't bother writing it down because I got you. And if you can't tell me where we were, it also tells me something else. You didn't study. All right. Yes, you're right. 16 and 17, we went into the different parts of 475. I want to go back there for a moment. Part 1 of 475 governs which people?
Us.
Us, okay. Licensed sales associates and broker associates and brokers. And real estate schools. We're regulated under the same. What's really cool is I teach the 14-hour course, and when my renewal comes up, guess what? I have to go to the 14-hour course. The deputy director on the Division of Real Estate said that she was going to send back some information to me. I will have to remind me. I will have to get a hold of her. Now, part 2 deals with appraising. Is appraising one of the 8 services of real estate? Well, if you don't really know whether that's yes or no at this point, I will tell you is yes. That's why, as a real estate sales associate, we can do an appraisal. I just can't do a certified appraisal because I don't have an appraiser's license. The reason that 475 was initially split into 2 parts, 3 and 4 didn't come along until a few years later, because federal law stepped in when all this stuff that was going on in the 80s with the way they were appraising property. You didn't have to worry about the property appraising, it always appraised. For those of you that remember that point in time. So when the federal government stepped in, they told the states you have to license your appraisers separately. So now we go back to the old routine. Do we have an existing law? Is the public being endangered? Well, we already been told that the public's being endangered because the federal government is saying what? This regulation has to be done under a separate platform. So what they did, very simply, was split 475 into two parts, us and the appraisers. Well, for example, when I go to the appraisers, instructors, continuing ed, the instructors from the appraisal board are also there. So they do a lot of things together, even though by law they have to be licensed separately. But they're still dealing with the same thing we are, aren't they? I mean, is the appraiser not dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with?
Yeah.
And the things that affect us in that regard also affect the appraiser. Then we have 3 and 4. These are very popular questions. I actually put a star beside number 3
Number 3?
and 4. Did I do both of them?
Yeah.
Okay, 3 and 4. Well, they are not both the answer. But if I don't give you both of them, you won't be able to separate out. What does part, 3 deal with? Commercial sales. How do I know that? Because it says so. And then the other one, 4 deals with,
Leasing.
but still
Commercial.
Because in non-residential, you cannot, by law, put a lien on the property for your commission. In residential, which I'll show you a little later in a couple chapters down the road, in residential, if you get the seller's written permission, you can put a lien on the property for your commission.
The wording for both can confuse somebody because they both start with gives a broker lien rights, even
Mhm.
though for one you can't and one you
But
can't.
see, you're right, it's what you can put a lien on.
Okay,
See, that's the real key, because in both cases, they talk about lien.
right.
The one that's for sales, what could they put a lien on? They couldn't put a lien on the property,
Commission,
but they could put a lien on
commission?
the net proceeds
gross.
of the sale, which is whose money? The money of the person who owes me my commission.
Yeah.
In that case, the owner of the property. The other one, which is also the owner of the property, but is the landlord in this case, can't put a lien on the property, but I can go after the rent. And if granted by the courts will instruct the tenant to pay X amount of dollars to the landlord for X amount of time until the broker has received their full commission. And then the monies will continue to flow back to the landlord. I wish you luck in enforcing either one of those two. It's great that there's there, but we all know stuff like this sometimes, it may cost you more money to prove you're right than just walking away.
Right, gotta take your battle.
Yeah, because see, commercial world is totally different than residential. Typically in residential, if I bring you a ready, willing, and able to meet the price and terms of the listing agreement, you owe me a commission. You don't have to sell, but you owe me a commission. And that's called being employed to obtain a buyer. In non-residential, it's employment to effect the sale, which translates to if it does not close for any reason, they're not entitled to commission. That's probably why you can't put a lien on the property under this situation. Everybody okay? All right, the next one is, which is 455, talks about the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. I don't get off on this discussion now, because in just in a few chapters, we'll go to in detail, exactly like chapter 3. However, that little figure at the bottom of page 17, I think it would be a good, quick, almost like a flashcard type thing. So I would probably put a bracket around it. Because most of these figures, when they do something like that, it's usually a list, and it's kind of a watered down version of what we just got talking about. So again, on page 17, all the way down past line 32, where it says governing powers.
The bracket?
Yeah. Simply for review purposes. Everybody signed in? Okay. Next page. Page 18, from lines 10 to 27, or 37, yes, 37, we did the chart on the board. How many types of licenses are there?
3. Well, it's 2 licenses.
One license.
Okay, make your mind up, is it 2 licenses or 3?
And then you got the broker associate.
And the way they make it sounds like 3 different licenses, but it's not. You either have a broker's license, or you have a sales associate's license. As a sales associate, I have one option,
To work.
and that's to be employed. I don't have to work. I only have to be employed.
To be active.
Meaning what?
To be active.
Now, meaning what?
Inactive.
I have been registered with an employer, either
Employed.
a broker or an owner developer. I mentioned it the other night, I'll mention it again. FREC uses the term employee irregardless of whether it is as an independent contractor or a W-2 employee. Because they don't give a shit about tax law. That they have nothing to do with tax law, not their responsibility. We, however, will make that distinction. I am not a 1099.
I was told I could join this class yesterday, so I
Okay.
didn't know what to.
How are you paying? What's the difference between a broker associate and a sales associate?
Broker associate, either can be a broker or who work under a broker. And the sales associate can only work for a broker. Or is a broker.
They decided to become broker associates and they have the same rights as we do, which is not.
So you're telling me a broker has options?
Yes.
I can do my own thing, which requires me to open an office, or I can choose to work with a broker, or an owner-developer. There is one negative to working for the owner-developer as a sales associate. Your time does not count towards qualifying for your broker.
Really?
No, I just made that up.
Are you serious or you not?
Do you? No, it's his own property. Owner-developer. Now, if he hires people to sell his property, depending on how they're paid, that may be a different story, which we'll get into as we go down the road. What can a sales associate do on their own?
Nothing.
If you don't get that real quick, you can stay home because you're not gonna pass. So there's two big things they're concerned about. Do you understand your relationship to other agents within your company and outside of it? And do you understand your relationship with the public? If you don't have a good handle on those requirements, those type of things are loaded for situations. That's why I try to throw as many of them at you as I can. And the key with the situation is, read the situation, and then look at your answers, and then go back to the situation. I don't like when I hear, read the question, and then think about what you believe the answer will be. That doesn't give a shit what you think the answer should be. She's given you 4 answers. Why would you be looking up here when the answers are here? And I watch people do that. All right, let's move on to page 19. And talking about application requirements. Now, this you should already know, for those of you that have applied, because you had to meet all these requirements. What I would like you to do is on page 19, starting with line 15, where it says fee waiver, through the bottom of the page.
Can you repeat that again, I'm sorry?
Yes, starting with line 15 to the bottom of the page,
Bracket.
bracket.
Thank you.
You'll notice that in these two, there are some exceptions, waivers. They're using the term waiver here. The one they seem to ask most about is the one with the members in the armed forces. And you'll see that that what you see here is probably typical of a lot of professional licenses that fall under the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. So I don't think that real estate is the only place where these fees are waived. Does that include the spouse?
Yes.
If during a member of active, during a period of active duty.
Or she's a widow.
If you're, based in Homestead, because you fly one of them jets that goes zipping over when any time the president shows up. I remember one day, they broke a sound barrier. That's how fast. Apparently, some little plane wandered into the no-fly zone. He had a big jet on his butt in about 2 seconds. That thing was welcome. I mean, you see them, but you never see them when they really crank them up. On the next page, it talks specifically about the waivers for military veterans and their spouses. How long do they have to get the license?
60.
From when?
An honorable discharge.
What kind of discharge?
Honorable.
You gotta look at what it doesn't say.
But that statement is usually pretty true about anything that they may be entitled to. And then you got that little chart that identifies all 3 things we just talked about.
It says that the fee waiver for military vets and their spouses applies to all types of professional licenses issued by the DEQ.
Mhm. You got it. The next thing it talks about is fingerprints. I will make a call in the morning to see if I can get the lady that comes out and does the fingerprints for us. Probably make it next Tuesday.
Tuesday,
Yeah. Oh, no, wait a minute.
Monday or Wednesday?
Monday.
Okay.
Give you this week in case you have to move something around, and give them a little leeway too, so sometime between Monday and Wednesday of next week, we'll try to do those so you can get, because they send them right out, they have the scanner. So we can do them very quickly, and the charge, I think, is $62, at least it has been. And check, cash, debit. I would recommend you not use a check. Why? Check is gonna have to clear before they'll send in your fingerprints, which simply slows down the process. So kind of keep that in mind, and I'll give you a firm night once I get a chance to speak to them. Do they check your background? That's kind of a stupid question for me to ask you when I just finished talking about what? Fingerprints. That's why you have to be very careful how you answer the questions on your application. You saw them sitting there. Because they want to know. Because they're going to give you a license and let you go out and mess with the public. If you've already shown in your recent history that you don't do a very good job of that, don't be shocked if they don't want to give you a license. Oh, by the way, if you got any kids that are old enough to go to the prom, warn them that it is a felony to go to Burger King, buy hamburgers, go to the locks, and feed the alligators. It is a felony. When she went to apply for her license, she was 35 years old with 3 kids. I don't think she's been out lately feeding alligators, but it took her 4 months to get a license. Now, you would think that, you know, shit, that's 18 years ago. She was a stupid kid. Probably Ian didn't even know they were doing anything wrong. Mom doesn't care. Shouldn't have been there. And being ignorant of the law, I don't think really is an excuse. At least my police officer sitting in the back of the room at the last class, that was interesting to have a member of the police department in class and watch how he reacted to certain scenarios that I would bring up. They weren't good looks.
Was that?
I think he's probably a good barometer of things that, are they really that bad? I can tell by the look on his face. Anything is, or you mess with the public, instantly, that's a problem. The whole idea of the law is to protect the public, you know. On page 21, they talk about the background check. I don't have anything particular to say about it. But probably the biggest thing is really the application side of it, of making sure that you write down what is. On page 22. How long do they have to decide if you're eligible or not?
90 days.
They have 30 days to request for inaccurate information. That's why you gotta be very careful when you're doing your application, that you didn't leave something out or make a mistake. Because they have 30 days to notify you that we can't process your application because you're missing X. I've heard a lot less of that now that they're doing it online like that. Where it used to be, everything was, you know, you got forms, you had to fill out the forms, put them in an envelope and send them to Tallahassee. At what point are you eligible to take the state exam?
21 days.
When they say it's after you've had the
Well, they tell you that you can.
and once they report it to the state, that you pass.
At what point when you can take the test, right?
After you
You can take it, you can sign up for it.
Last exam, they
Register for it or take
They
it?
record it
When the
with the state.
application is complete.
So
The application is complete
So
and
there's no
processed.
applications.
Do you understand that the more you talk, the more likely what you're saying is wrong? Decide on which answer you want to choose, and choose it, and then shut the hell up. Because if you do that in this room, guess where else you're gonna do it? On a test. It's just your nature. So we may, you know, have to deal with some therapy here. I am not licensed to be one, but dealing with buyers and sellers and real estate agents, I've had to learn how. Well, let's see. I probably have to submit an application. I probably have to take the course and pass the course exam. I have to add that my fingerprints don't show things it shouldn't show. If I do all those things, I'm now eligible to take the state exam. True.
What's the linear sense and all this?
Now, can I apply for the state exam right now?
No.
Why not?
Doesn't have to be
Because you
that.
need
Going on the
to
process.
get
Because you haven't been approved to take the test.
Right.
So if you haven't been approved,
You can.
you can't schedule it. But you're gonna get approved, hopefully within the next couple of weeks.
Once you get that,
Then you get on the machine and crack it up and tell them when you wanna take the exam. And hopefully they have availability. Because, there's not a lot of real estate agents in Florida. So it'll be no trouble finding a slot to be able to take the exam. Used to be, it was given in 3 places in the whole state, one time a year. Miami, Orlando, and either Jacksonville or Tallahassee. That was your options. Because the exam was administered by the Division of Real Estate. And then, the cronies up there decided, you know what, we're gonna outsource this exam shit. You're still gonna go through the process, make sure you're qualified, and then we'll notify the testing company. What's the name of the testing? agency? Pearson View. View. It's there someplace. And then you'll notice there's another paragraph talking about U.S. Armed Service members and their spouse. What's this one about?
Reciprocity,
What's that mean?
you giving me that?
I'm stationed in Idaho. I'm being transferred to Homestead. My spouse got a real estate license to help supplement the income of the family. So now they're gonna move to Florida.
So Florida's gotta get my license.
So,
Reciprocity means they recognize the license in the
Right.
other state,
right.
that they get the same.
And that's the only time the reciprocity you'll hear about in Florida. Unlike some of the northern states, for example, that have reciprocity with each other, simply meaning if they're in good standing in one side, you get the license in the other. In a moment, I'll show it to you, but we have something called mutual recognition. In mutual recognition, there are certain states that, including Florida, Georgia is another one, Connecticut is one, they've all agreed that their basic information is very similar. The only difference really comes into their regulation. So, of all those states that are a part of this group of mutual recognitions, if you want to say right now, you got your Florida license and you want to get your license in Georgia, all you got to do is apply to Georgia. If you meet the requirements to get a license here, there'll be a pretty good chance that it's not going to be a problem there. And once you're approved, you have to take a 40-question exam based upon Georgia law. If you pass, they will issue you the comparable license in Georgia that you have in Florida. I found it interesting that Connecticut was one of the ones we have mutual recognition with. For whatever reason, they didn't put it in this particular book.
23.
Yeah. On 23, lines 1 through 13 should have a bracket. 1 through 13. Then I want you to go back to the previous page. We talked about reciprocity for U.S. Armed Service members. Bracket. And a star.
Just for the reciprocity section?
Yeah.
Where's the record? 23 to what?
35.
35?
That whole paragraph. Obviously, the answer is not the whole.
What are I'm just saying from what you just said, the only two states that have reciprocity with.
No, it's not the
Okay.
only two states.
But it's Georgia, Connecticut, and,
Thank you, Illinois.
not many.
No, probably 8 to 10.
Not New York and Florida?
Hell no.
Definitely no.
We have enough problems with New York down here. You have to realize that I'm in a southern state, and I also happen to be southern. How many of you speak more than one language? Just out of curiosity. Good. I do too. English and southern. And trust me, there is a difference.
Is that like English and Northern?
Yeah. Well, think about the dialects in the New England states. I was watching one of those home and garden TV, building home thing, and they had one episode in Massachusetts. I had to really listen carefully. But it's funny, because we talk about people with accents. There are more accents in this country probably than there are in the world. Now, I'm not talking about people who moved here. Because I'm going on vacation for the first time in a long time. And we have friends that have a home up in the mountains of Georgia. So I'm looking forward to that. Because I grew up in the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. And about 5 miles straight ahead, as a crow flies, you know what that means? Straight line. I know where you're from, we know where if you don't.
So what's the plural of y'all?
Plural of y'all, that is plural.
Y'all.
Oh, by the way, I slipped to the store. What's that mean?
Wait till the store.
No, I'm gonna be right back.
Oh,
If I'm slipping,
you're doing a round trip.
I'm doing it fast.
Okay.
I have realized, oh, by the way, another question I didn't ask. My daughter's an excellent writer. She actually teaches at FAU. I am really trying to figure out how I can pull it off. I would love to write a book from 41 years of doing this. How many of you grew up in a farm? Me? Yeah, 600 acres. Where?
Wouldn't you be in Florida?
Yeah,
Back in the
different
day.
world than where I came from.
I spent a lot of time in a farm in central Jersey. Still a farm.
No, it really isn't. It's not. I spent a summer after my senior year in college up in Poughkeepsie, New York, because my brother-in-law was managing the farm up there. And they were baling hay to send to the islands. And so I spent a month baling hay, about 15 hours a day. Then I was ready to come home. But that was interesting. But it's funny to, when you talk about where you're from, and it really got me when I first came down here. Some people would say, well, where are you from? Virginia. Well, where are your parents from? Virginia. Where are your grandparents from? Virginia. Because they've been there for so long. And interesting too, when I got to college, for whatever reason, the college I went to, which is Lynchburg College in Virginia, a lot of the northern kids who were looking for a particular type of college, Lynchburg College was very cheap compared to where they could go in New York and New Jersey. So there were more people from New York and New Jersey there than there were from Virginia. All my friends were from New York and New Jersey. So it really got weird because you realize my accent was real heavy when I went there. I got to the point where I was saying half the word in Southern and the other half of it in New York. Then I married a New Yorker. But what language they speak, what dialect they have, to me is something I want to pick up on. You know what? She said what? She grew up on a farm. She was on the farm. We have an instant connection. A connection that's very different than anybody else in the room. But because this business is about what? People. And making connection with people where you can do business with them because they're comfortable with you. So I'm always looking for where is that mutual thing. For the most part, normally I'm very lonely up here. But it is funny because I'll make statements and talk about things and people will look in the room will look at me like, what the hell's he talking about? Well, if you haven't ever experienced it, guess what? You don't know. All right. I decide to move to Georgia. Does that mean I have to give up my license? No. By the way, do I have to be a resident of Florida to get a license?
No.
Do I have to be a U.S. citizen to get a license?
No.
So I don't have to be a resident. I don't have to be a citizen. So I live in Iceland. Unfortunately, there's no mutual recognition. But I have a friend that lives in Florida that is a real estate broker and has their own office. So online in Iceland, I take the course. I pass the course. I apply for the state exam. I'm able to, through the internet, find a testing company that would coordinate with Pearson VUE to get the exam sent over. I pass the state exam, I get my sales associate license. I now have my friend in Florida. I understand I haven't left Iceland yet. It's the middle of winter and nobody goes out. I had my friend, who was a broker in Florida, register as my employer. Now, I gotta do that 45-hour shift. So I do what? I get on the internet, I find, a school that offers the course online. I take the 45-hour course, I pass it, I don't have to take a state exam. On my next renewal, I have to do 14 hours, which again I can do online, and renew my license. So far, I haven't been on Florida yet. Now, I'm not going to go through the requirements, you realize now, I can now qualify to get a broker's license. And open up my own brokerage office. In Finland, I'm in Iceland. Because nothing in 475 says the office has to be in Florida.
What happens if you live in Iceland and you don't have a social security number?
Not my problem.
Then you can't, mother won't accept.
I have a license, but my social security number, well, if I don't have something, I can't provide it. Do you know why you have to provide the social security number?
It's a background check.
That's how they know everything.
No, wait a minute. Did you pay your alimony last month?
Right.
Good. Or he'll get an email from the Department of Business and Federal Regulations saying, you didn't pay your alimony. We're suspending your license. Please contact us at this number. So you ladies better make damn sure you keep paying.
Anything else on that list?
That's the reason for the social security number. Well, you realize that if FREC holds up your license, it might hold up any other professional licenses that are regulated under the department. So either you pay or you made a bad deal, but guess what? You still need to be paying. Because everybody says, why do I need to know my social security number? If I move to Georgia, how long do I have to tell them I moved?
60 days.
60 days. If I sell the house I'm living in and move down the street to another house, how long do I have?
10 days.
No,
10 days.
10 days. It's 30 days if you're moving out of state. If you're moving within state, it's 10 days. To notify them that you've moved. Why is this requirement there? Because the department has a responsibility for making sure that any correspondence that should be sent to you gets there. However, you could cause a problem in them meeting their requirements because you're not where you say you are. So it's very important, whether you're moving down the street or whether you're moving to Georgia, that you let them know you've moved. Now, think about it. If I took the explanation away, it would sound ridiculous. That's why in law, especially regulatory law, unless you know the history behind it, a lot of times it doesn't make sense. Why do I have to do that? It's like the social security number. What do you need that for? Probably not something you expected to hear. All right, on page 23, starting with line 14, let's go bracket to the rest of the page. And on the top of 24, lines 1 through 6. Is mutual recognition the same as reciprocity?
No.
Answer is no. Because in reciprocity, if you are in good standing in the state you're in, the other state that participates will give you a license equivalent to whatever your license is wherever you came from. But if you you were in Georgia and you were gonna plan on moving to Florida, and for some reason you never got around to taking the 40-question test, and now you've been in Florida for 6 months, can I still qualify?
No.
No,
Why?
too much time went by.
Why? Why did too much time go by? Because in the next paragraph, it says if you're here for 4 months consecutively, you're a Florida resident. Now, that's 475 talking. That's not other statutes. It's only 475 we're talking about. It doesn't affect other things, like homestead and stuff. You have to qualify for it, but the second you buy a property and move in as your homestead, it's your homestead. You have to qualify or register to get the benefits and tax benefits. We have a lot of benefits in the homestead that's there simply because it's your homestead. What's a homestead?
It's a business, like,
It is your primary,
from the
Right.
primary
Resident.
resident.
it's not where you live. I don't live in Florida, but it's registered as my homestead. And I've paid cash for my $3 million house. So my creditors can't get to it until I sell it.
For you.
Well, the bad boys actually use it to their benefit too. But the paragraph lines 7 through 15 there on 24. And again, it's only based upon the guidelines of 475. That's that much, folks.
Oh.
That's why I keep backing into you.
You have to kind of.
I will go. I think cash.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Sure.
Should I leave now or wait?
No, don't miss it.
Okay.
So 7 through 15.
Yeah, 7 through 15.
Correct.
Bracket,
This one.
page 24. There are 2 books. You want the one that's not the exam ready. That one you can leave home. You don't need to bring that one. On page 25, you see there in the gray box, there's where it mentions the social security number. And notice the reference to 475.
So how do you get a license without being a citizen if you don't have a social security?
You can get a social as a resident.
You can get, there are other licenses that you can get to take the place of the social security. I'll leave that up to my immigration attorney. Because I think they might have a good handle on that. What'd you say?
CPN number, temporary?
Not sure what it's called.
So you're saying there's something that, other than the social security number, that you could acquire?
Yes.
Because I didn't know that.
They use it for banking, all kind of stuff.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, they keep that.
TI.
Check,
Yeah.
where the money is going.
Yep.
And you know how see how I answered his question?
Yeah.
I didn't. I sent him to the right person to answer that question. You realize your customers are gonna ask you questions about real estate and anything that might relate to real estate. And whatever you tell them, they're gonna believe. until they find out that you're lying through your teeth or didn't know what you were talking about. But seriously, if they have a rapport with you, whatever you tell them for the most part, they're gonna be willing to do.
Be walking
Which
around
means I need to know what I'm doing. By the way, you know when you'll understand all this stuff? Never. Well, this thing changes just this book changes 20% every year. So you know that means about the stars, right? What do I have to do every year when the new edition comes out? A new set of stars. I've considered eliminating the stars, but it would screw up the way I teach the course, so you're safe for a while. All right, on page 26. Actually, the whole page should have a bracket. And again, you should be aware of most of this stuff. If you apply for the license, you should be aware of most of this. Class exam, how many questions?
100.
Score,
70 or above.
state exam,
70
100.
class.
75 or above.
75. Which means I can miss 30%, 35% of the test and have a license. Not bad, huh? Yeah. What did I say, 35?
Yeah, he said 35. I was like,
Well, now I at least know you can do math.
65.
I get the 5 part right.
Attorneys who are members of the bar.
But don't get to that yet. Begin. We'll get there in a minute. Let's start at the top and work our way down. What if you fail the class exam?
we're not.
Well, I understand that, but I say,
That's right.
for test purposes, and to answer questions,
You get a read.
You can take it back.
you have to take it again.
30 days.
Do you have to wait
30
days.
30 days?
To retake it if you
But you get a waiver, that's how you get your therapy. Yeah, isn't there a waiver on that?
I think it's for the state exam.
No, it's for the end of course exam, it's not to wait 30 days. Doesn't show there's a waiver for that. Right, that's not a waiver, so that's-
No, it's just the retest. So basically, if you don't pass, you don't do fine.
Correct.
What does it say?
So you're gonna have to wait 30 days to retake the exam.
Right.
If you failed it the second time, if you live after doing that, you get to watch my shining face for another 63 hours. Yeah, it is. Screw my passing average like that, you're gonna be in big trouble.
Over here.
Good. How long do I have to pass the state exam?
3 years.
3 years? No.
2.
From when?
From the day that
From
you
the
passed.
day
The class.
The day they get your application.
It says within 2 years after the course completion date,
Mm-hmm.
so that's not the day that you did your application.
Then you pass the pre-license
End
exam.
of course exam.
In this case, August 28th.
And you pass the test here.
Right.
Yeah, that's the completion date.
Yeah, that's when you complete, you know,
Mhm.
and you hand you that paper.
On the next page on the top.
So if you fail, you can take it every 30 days for 2 years?
No, it says there, within 1 year of the original examination, a student may retest a maximum of 1 time. Well, that's referring to the 30. You wouldn't have to do it at the end of 30 days. They're gonna give you a whole
A whole year.
year. But the likelihood, if you waited that long, you'd pass the test.
Not like that.
No, it's not likely, you won't.
But that's the beginning,
Now, if you go over to 27, under license examinations,
yeah. Mhm.
there it talks about the scores that you have to get on the state exam.
Will you bracket that?
Now, what we're gonna bracket, star, is at the bottom of page 46, where it compares attorneys to 4-year degree real estate students.
The star?
It has a star. The student is exempt from everything except
Continuing education.
continuing education. You'll notice that's not true for the attorneys. As an attorney, I don't have to take the course and the course exam. However, I do have to pass the state exam. Once I meet the requirements, I want to become a broker as an attorney, I have to go to the broker's course and pass the course and pass the broker state exam.
That's all this was covered in.
So if
last
I'm
week.
looking at being an attorney and I want to become a broker, the broker's course I'm going to have to take and pass. I'm going to have to pass the state exam for brokers. And I'm going to have to do the post-license course for brokers. But notice that the attorneys don't do the continuing ed. Why? Because they have continuing ed for their membership in the bar.
CLE.
So that, the FREC has given them a credit for those hours, which is sufficient to cover the 14. Not the 45 hour, which is the course you take before your first renewal. I had one class that had 2 attorneys in here. Because what they had practiced was, number 1, in another state, and number 2, wasn't Rome State. See, I think, with our attorneys and our doctors are 2 good examples of where we expect our doctor to know what? Everything.
Well, laws anyway, that they own.
You know what? If my focus is on feet, I don't know much about the heart. And I don't think if you are a podiatrist, I don't want you anywhere near my heart. I don't give a shit that you're a doctor. I don't give a shit how much continuing education you've done. However, I didn't go to her because she had no continuing education. And she got her license 30 years ago. And has never done any continuing education as a doctor. And she has this capital in her hands. Are you feeling comfortable about this situation or not? Well, how about this? I haven't taken continuing education except online where I didn't do shit for the last 40 years. Haven't tried to upgrade myself to broker level, know more about the business. Are you really eager to list your property with me?
No.
Okay, so be real careful about downing the education part of this. Because it's just like any other professional you go to. They don't keep up with what's going on. How many houses sold in your community in the last month?
I do not know.
How many residential rental units are available in Buckhorn Town? And you want me to do what?
Sell.
You want you want to put your hands, and let you put your hands in my pocket?
Because you didn't do your research.
This is true. That's why I say, in this business, never stop learning. The way you do, the minute you do, you take your checkbook out. Because you're gonna screw up a deal. And running, I love to see the agents that go running to Ben when they screwed up and say, well, what are you gonna do? And the Ben says, nothing. He says, I didn't screw it up.
You did.
You did. It's amazing. They're independent contractors over here when everything's going great.
Right.
And when it falls apart because they don't pay attention, they want mom in a hurry. I hope you don't become one of those kind of agents. I'm gonna have your ass fired if you do. Because you're dangerous to the rest of the world in my profession. All right, moving on. On page 28, just for kicking giggles, on the top of the page, you can potentially qualify to take the state exam in your language. There's a process that you have to go through to get approved. I haven't had anybody do that yet, so I can't really give you much information about it, other than what's there. Post license. What class are you in now?
Free.
And after you take the course and pass, and the state exam and pass, then you
45.
go to do the 45-hour post license. How long is that course?
45 hours.
Okay.
Always.
Rest of you think about it for a while. There is an exam, class exam, no state exam.
Class exam?
Wow.
No state exam?
Yeah. And you have to have 75. 75 seems to be a very popular number around. And you're gonna take that 45-hour course the first time we offer it after you pass.
Is it? A year?
Yeah,
State.
Oh, same time?
no. I'm starting one July the 10th. I'll be through by the end of July.
Oh, fine, time.
We would take
The hours.
till like September.
Well,
Same day, same time.
Yeah.
depends. We also have it online.
So you,
See, the problem of it is, one other person has an instructor's license here, other than me, and that's Ben. It's gonna be one of the teaching classes. But we'll worry about that when that gets here. Yeah. some solutions to that. Would it be a good idea, since I'm starting class on July the 10th, for you to go ahead and take that 45-hour course?
No.
Why?
Yeah,
don't
we
have to.
haven't taken yours.
You know, taking it free.
You're also not licensed.
We haven't,
You're not licensed yet.
we're not finished.
Okay, you don't have to get hostile. I
What are you trying to say?
I get hostile and you get upset. You get hostile, it's okay.
Stop blubbering.
All right, age 30, let's get a broker's license. Now, you have to obviously done FREC1 and passed the state exam and completed the 45-hour course. You can't get around that course by saying, okay, at the end of 2 years, I'm gonna take the broker's course, which might be, which probably won't be before your first license expires.
Is your first license good for a year?
No. The answer to that question is depends. I'll show you in a little bit why I said depends. In order to get a broker's license, do I have to have experience?
2 years.
Yes or no?
Yes.
What kind of experience?
Associate.
2 years.
And what do I have to do? Okay, you tell me I have to be a sales associate, which means I have to put my license with a broker.
An active real estate license for 25
Alright.
months.
Well, wait a minute. I don't have to do anything?
72 hours.
I don't have to do anything?
72 hours.
No production requirements?
A lot.
Is there any production requirements to obtain my broker's license? Everybody look at me. Remember the little routine I did before when I took you all the way from taking the course until your first 14-hour course? Okay. I say it's bad because I usually give you the answers before I ask the question. So the 45-hour course needs to be taken prior to your first renewal, which will be somewhere between 18 and 24 months after you obtain the license. And I said in a little bit, I'll explain the reasoning behind that. So as a broker, to become a broker, I'm a sales associate. I'm that sales associate from Iceland. I've had my license with my friend for the last 2 years. I have still not set foot on the state of Florida. So I can take the broker's course, pass it, and if it's been 2 years or more, I can apply to take the broker's state exam. If I pass, I will have a broker's license. That broker's license will be inactive. Unless, when I applied to take the broker's state exam, I indicated that I was going to stay with the broker I was with. Then it will come out as a broker associate. Because in one situation, I have a registered employer, whereas in the other, but wait a minute, that's not possible, is it? Because if I didn't have an employer and my license was inactive, the clock is not ticking. Now, you understand that active doesn't mean you're doing anything. It means you are employed with a broker. So if I do 800 deals this month, last year, and he did one, Which one person's more active? Neither. From FREC's point of view. From business point of view, different story, but that's not what this is about. So, I don't have to do any production. I lived in England. And I've been a sales associate for the last 5 years. My wife and I decided to move north. Can we go directly to the broker's course?
You were a broker associate, or you?
No, I was a sales
Sales
associate.
associate in England.
No.
So the question really is, that 2-year period, does it have to be with a Florida broker? The answer to that question is no. That's it. Because nothing in the law says you have to do business. The law says you have to meet the requirements to obtain a license and the requirements to step up a level and requirements to maintain your license. And all of that is education-based. It is not production-based. There are states where you can get a broker's license, but until you've done X number of transactions and closed them, they don't feel that you're prepared to run a real estate office. Do you realize that I could get a broker's license here, not knowing doodly about brokering real estate, and wind up opening my own office? Knowing absolutely nothing about salesmanship and actually being able to sell something or help a buyer buy something. But you passed a bunch of tests and went to a bunch of courses. That's why your knowledge never is complete. Because what I just said is relatively new. I change it next year. Because FREC and their little investigators watch the type of things you as real estate agents do that could jeopardize the public. Then it'll go through a processing to determine, is there something we need to do to prevent that activity? So you gotta kind of understand the dynamics of what's going on here. And when you hear what I rattled off about a license, it's like weird. I can literally have a license, never set foot on in the state of Florida, and be an active broker. And if I find these mutual recognition states, and I can pass those tests, I'm gonna have licenses all over the place. I won't know doodly about what I'm doing, but I got the license. I say this jokingly because when you hear the word employed and all the other terms that are used, it sure makes it sound like that they expect you to do something. They don't. They obviously want to see you make a living, but that's not their job. Your success is not their job. Because their job is to protect the public from you. If you don't understand that, there's where you get yourself in trouble. Instead of saying the customer's always right, even if they're always wrong. All right, on page 30, lines 8 through 33. Bracket. And 1 through 3, there's 3 statements there, which really talks about the amount of time you have to be active to get the broker's license as a start, which would correspond to lines 14 through 26. I'm sorry, 25.
One, two, and three before that, before the 8.
We're
I'm a little
just going to
confused.
do.
Oh, okay.
No, what?
Starting with line 14 through the bottom of the page.
Oh, okay, yes.
The broker's post license, which they mentioned at the top of page 31, is 2 30-hour courses or 1 60-hour course, depending on how you set it up. If it's broken up, one of them is on investing, the other is on management. But management, to me, would make sense. This person now has a broker's license. Do they know how to manage a brokerage company? On page 31, the last 2 paragraphs on the page talk about registration and licensure. Let's put a bracket around lines 14 through 36.
Can you repeat what was this mark? 31?
On 31,
14
14
to 13.
through 36.
Where's the one you said?
A bracket or a star?
A bracket and the star.
Got it.
Hang on.
Because they're comparing the term registration to the term licensure. Which one would indicate you were qualified to have a license?
Licensure.
Licensure. Registration is where you're at right now. You have registered. You do not have licensure. Once you get your fingerprints, once you pass that through, once you pass this course in the state exam, you have licensure. You're not qualified to be given a license. That's an interesting term, licensure. You don't see that much around. On the next page, it shows you what the license looks like. When you register, when you applied for the state exam, did you set up a file for yourself with the username and a password?
Yes.
Because that's going to be all the official records that you have regarding your real estate license. So you can go in and check to see if I've registered your continuing education. When you take the 45-hour course, you're not going to take a state exam, so I really don't have to give you a passing slip. I do for my own reasons. But I have to go into an app that the state puts out, and I have to input the information off your registration, indicating what course you took, and did you successfully complete it. So it's It's not just, oh, great, he graded my test and now he's through. No, you get more work to do. Think I need this district. If I show you my real estate license, is that a guarantee that my license is current and valid?
No. I wouldn't think so.
Look at the license.
Yes.
And tell me if that license tells me whether or not I got revoked yesterday.
Yes.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, no.
If you went into the website of the department and you looked up my name, you would then see what? That I was revoked. But that's why your license is considered prima facie evidence that you are currently active. It's not absolute proof. What does prima facie mean?
Face value.
On the face of it. On the face of it, it appears to be fine. Yeah, and there's a license for me. And there's a license for school. So, in a real estate situation, there is an artificial person, and there's a natural person. The artificial person is who you pay and who gives you a passage slip. The natural person is simply carrying out the responsibilities of the unnatural. Now, at the bottom of the page, it tells you what is actually on the license, which I think you can tell by looking at it. Page 33, a bracket to the bottom, no, I'm sorry, a bracket down to line 23.
From 1 to 23?
1 to 23, yes, including the box. This page is absolutely critical. It does not have a star.
No star.
It's not, everything?
Hmm?
It's critical.
Mm-hmm.
It's a star?
But it's not a star.
No, it's not gonna be on.
It's critical because if you don't understand this, this affects potentially 20 or 30 different types of questions they could ask you. Now, I kept saying to you the 8 services of real estate. And I kept saying to you, appraising was one of the 8 steps of, one of the 8 types of services. When I started, there was no A. In the A bar sale, it was just bar sale. Which means that it wasn't 8 services, it was only 7. Now, I'm not going to explain the first one now. I'm going to let you take it at face value. It talks about advertising real estate services. I think that should be pretty obvious. Here's what I want to ask you. What is the difference between buy and sell? Because they're both services of real estate. What's the difference?
When you buy, you give away money, and you sell it, you receive something for it.
I'm going to give you a little suggestion. Don't base your answer on money. Because 9 times out of 10, that will get you the wrong answer. Just a little thought process.
It's, it matters who you represent.
Thank you. Bingo. Because it's about the public. It isn't about your wallet. Because when she said what she said, it wasn't about her, it wasn't about the public, it was about her. Which is understandable, it's what the hell I'm getting in this business for, is to do what? Make money. Okay, that's good. Everybody hear what she said? You can think about it from the perspective of the way we've looked at things, makes sense. How about rent versus lease?
Same. Are you doing-
If they were the same, they would be on the same line.
No, like, it's like what he said, it's who
Well,
you're
we're
representing. Are you
representing-
representing somebody who's looking to rent, or are you representing somebody who's looking to lease out to somebody else?
So who's the lease side representing?
The what side?
The lease.
The,
The one who has.
Here, watch.
The landlord.
The landlord starts with what letter?
L.
And lease starts with what letter?
L.
Okay. And you rent a unit. See, these are, remember, these are verbs, not nouns. See, because in your mind, rent is how much you pay each month. That's a noun. Services are not nouns. Services are verbs, they're actions. Interesting, depending on how you look at something, or a word that you look at, or how you interpret it, can totally change it, like the word rent.
Contract.
All right. I would like you to take a moment, if you will, starting on, I'm on page 33, starting with line 5. I'd like you to read through line 23. When you finish, I have a question for you. So when you finish, look up so I know you're. Okay, yes,
I'll ask after.
I have a question for you. I am an investor. I buy and sell real estate. I don't have a real estate license. My next door neighbor is a roof contractor. Obviously, they have a GC license, but doesn't have a real estate license. The gentleman that has the roofing company knows that I am an investor, know a lot about real estate. And he decides that he wants to sell his home, but he doesn't want to use a real estate agent. He can't stand it. So, he comes to me and says, listen, I would like to sell my property. If you can sell it for $300,000 in 30 days, I'll put a new roof on your house. That sounds like a good deal. I sold the house in 25 days for $350,000. Good. Ain't I? Closing was yesterday. I was waiting for him to come up in his truck to do the measuring and stuff for the roof. And he's disappeared in the sunset. So I never got my roof. The question is, has the law been violated?
Yes.
Yes.
Water.
No.
Yes.
They never received anything.
Yes.
How many of you say the law has not been violated? How many of you say the law has been violated? Somebody that said that they felt the law had been violated, I'd like a justification for that answer. Who would like to do that?
No. I don't know if you're raising answer.
It's okay. Remember when I told you about participation? See, she's gonna have a 75 or more. Go.
The law was violated
Why?
because there was an expectation of compensation even though it wasn't fulfilled.
But I didn't get paid.
You did everything under the assumption that you would.
What if I didn't?
Doesn't matter, you had that expectation of receiving something for your services.
Oh, wait a minute. That doesn't seem right. Justify that answer.
It says in the book.
Say, tell me what it says. I want to hear the words. I don't believe shit until I hear the words.
It says,
Offer to
Right.
agree or to
Because
attempt
the
to
money
perform
says so.
real estate activities, the roof.
compensation
No.
is defined as anything that's promised or
Wait, 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 wait.
received. or paid.
Whoa. Does everybody know what shut up means? Okay, that's what I'd like you to do right now. I need to hear one voice. That's this one right here. Justify why you're telling me that he has been compensated.
Oh, compensation, according to the law, is saying also the expectation of compensation.
Read it to me, please.
Compensation is defined as anything of value or a valuable consideration, directly or indirectly paid, promised, or expected to be paid or received. It includes money, commissions, gratuities, also dinners, flowers, wine, gift certificates, event tickets, and so forth.
There's a book out there.
Or a roof.
Been around for about 2,000 years that says, if you think it, you've already done it. They violated the law. But wait a minute, Dale, how would they even know they violated the law? They didn't have licenses, it was just between the two of them. Ignorance is no excuse, I think is another one of the interesting things in law. And, you know what? When you went home and told Mom, well, I didn't realize it. After she knocks your ass off on the floor, she'll explain it to you, or maybe not. Now, everybody should have got that question right. Because what was the key word in that whole thing? Compensation. So I hope you all realize now, commission and compensation are not synonyms. Commission is only one form of
Compensation.
saying you're gonna get something or expecting to get something. See, expecting to get something doesn't mean that the other side necessarily said what? Anything. You just told them I was gonna do this, I wasn't gonna be doing it for free. I figured that was understood. And if it ain't writing, you should. That's a very important thing you better learn about this business. If it ain't black and white, it does not exist.
That's what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah, that's what I was.
That's why I had a tough time answering the question. I didn't know if-
Did he receive compensation according to the definition in your book?
Yes.
Compensation by definition means he accepted one of those things. But if you didn't.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Expected.
Man, the best thing, you need to know the law, so.
Expected to receive.
This person selling promised to put a roof on their house. Since the person made a promise, we have the right to expect that they'll uphold that.
But in the code of
But
law,
that's
the
why
judge-
we have courtrooms, because the law's there and says that, but some of us choose to ignore it. And that's when you wind up with an attorney.
But you can't take that to court and you, it's the law.
Now, I appreciate your opinions and your perspectives. I'm just not interested. This is something you have to understand where it comes from and how they look at it.
Doesn't matter what you think it is, what it is.
Yep.
So,
Because intent to violate the law is a violation, even if the act never occurs.
The only thing you will be very hard to prove in the court of law.
Oh, so you mean that if I don't get caught, I didn't do anything wrong?
No, that's not what I mean.
No, that's what I heard.
Well, he did do something wrong because he didn't have a license, it's saying in the book also, you must have a license.
No, what I said is, if I don't get caught, I didn't do anything wrong.
So he, both of them were,
Because nobody back knew that we would agree to that, it's just the two of us.
It was still
And we didn't even tell our wives.
Didn't get caught.
so what's a fist bump?
So,
What's a what?
A fist bump,
What do you mean, what's a physical?
to sell my own.
Right.
It's because I'm selling my own real estate.
Yeah. Buying, selling versus brokering. We're not here to buy and sell. We're here to broker. That's what I talk about when I say scenarios. That's why when I tell you there's information on it extremely important, but isn't the question, but determines the answer to the question. Can I pay a referral fee for somebody that's not licensed?
Yes. Yes.
Violation.
Can I pay a referral fee for someone who is licensed in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Provided, this is new. In our files now, we have a copy of the license of all the agents and companies involved in that transaction, showing that they have current active license. Why? Because the state is seeing that a lot of people out there are being suspended, revoked, or let the license expire, or whatever the case may be. So they do not have a current valid active license, and they're doing business. See, there's an example of something just changed. Big deal. We now are including a new program to figure out how to be able to check that out. because each agent now in their files have to put all the agents that are in that transaction and the real estate companies that are a part of that. But when you go into where the licenses are, you can actually pull down the sheet that indicates whether the person is active or not, and indicates the company they are licensed with. It's just a matter of how you go in to do the search. But that's an example of every time. See, now, that problem was caused by people violating law. And I have a hard time accepting you didn't know. Well, I didn't know my license had expired. Tell the cop when he stops you that you didn't realize your license expired. Well, you can relicense, remember that I'm giving you a ticket. It's the same difference. It's been the responsibility, it's the company's responsibility, it's your responsibility to make sure you keep your life current and active. Obviously, it's become a problem when you get a mandate down from the state that this is what they want you to do. Because it adds an extra amount of time and a file, especially the person doing the compliance. Because even then, I go in and check to see if the license is really there. Because some of them, the way they're pulling it down, there's no license there. They pulled down the wrong thing. All right, I think maybe 810 deserves a break. So we take one. Or contact them.
She lazy.
And
She's probably come another time.
yeah, you know what? I'll try. Well,
Read now, huh? Nothing wrong with reading.
What else do we do? What is Monday? What's the
you should.
I know, now I was gonna say something.
Smooth.
Right, because you're coming at rush hour north. I think it's only 2 days. Exactly. You're like, that's nonsense. Yeah, that's nonsense, and then you got the two. I know exactly what it is. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, there's always one that you know is not the answer. Don't waste your time with that one. So, how early do you start your day? Do you live down there? Oh my God. So you drive back home or something? That's worth it. That's fun. Yeah, it comes in traffic like 30 or.
I'm just driving in.
Solis, where the Honoration Building is?
I know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I haven't tried. I haven't tried it. My computer.
Exactly. It's no fun.
I'm late every day. Why you come Oh my God.
That's a driver.
Okay, I thought I did a
Never
drive. Oh
mind.
my God, you do a drive.
That's a driver.
was rain too.
Wow. Oh my God.
It had some traffic.
Yeah.
No, some of it's already familiar. You want to actually.
They're very intense, I mean, like, put everything in perspective. Because it's like, the reason why I would say, no, he wasn't invited.
That's what I wanted to ask him, how can we get
They don't have a
access to the
license.
videos, because I know that
The
they're
officers don't have
recording.
license. How can they be aware of breaking the law? If they never took the courses to know what exactly the law you're breaking.
They don't have license, they have to know the laws.
You have to see how it's doing.
Right.
To protect themselves.
They can get-
People understanding.
To go and know the laws.
So when you first said that, I'm like, did they sign something saying that he's gonna do that, or it was just verbal? You know?
Yeah, my mom was.
But I guess just the thought of, it mentioned,
Oh my.
it was a law already.
Maybe I always like,
No,
9 o'clock, the traffic is gone. Like I always get, I'm getting.
An hour? So you get home by 10:30.
Okay, that's not so bad.
Hey, I work in football,
Wait, so you.
You look good, you can work here.
14 weeks you
not no.
Oh, okay.
Oh, they really gonna sell you.
Yeah.
I used to go to church for 2 years, man.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
That's a drive.
Listen, when I was
I'm used
18, I
to it, I'm
loved
a truck
driving.
driver.
Oh, okay. That explains it then. Yeah, 2 hours is nothing for you.
I'm trying to transition over the truck now.
What if, over the period you live with them for 2 years, you decide to,
What's my-
It doesn't matter.
what's my-
You guys
If you don't
are-
say nothing, it doesn't even matter.
This is, you're your own boss. You're just here to help you.
No, I'm fine.
because we have to be with them for 2 years.
Oh, yeah, but you don't have to sell anything.
No, so nothing you don't want.
You're just active.
Yeah, yeah, just take the classes and then do what you want after.
But you know You know, it's not a people going to know the our management yeah, it's like, they make money from that as well.
You mean like,
The management companies.
like
Oh, like property management?
condos and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Like camp, like a camp?
That guy, I have a house in Sunrise, he charges 20% of the rent.
Wow.
Wow.
And my sister's a leasing agent, but she doesn't have a real estate license. Yeah.
Oh, so you do
I'll take her job. When we're done.
There's a lot of opportunities.
The opportunities are there, no question. It's just, when you guys get into the law, I'm gonna be.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Really,
Are you sure of that?
that's the scary part of the law.
Okay.
I
You are?
But through blood,
I'll take it.
great, I mean,
I mean,
I can.
with all the laws I know, I
keep
should
my
just
day
avoid
to
it.
the bond.
Because I did special education,
Mhm.
and that
Okay.
test is all laws too. So you have to know the law when you're working with special needs.
Then you got a plus there, that's good.
I may as well just become a lawyer at this point. Honestly. I know special laws.
As long as I know
This
some.
law.
Just, I said, you're not teaching me, so my hairdresser. Yes, but she speaks to me. I said, what, you don't want to
Like,
know your
I
conversation
did
on the
it, I did it
phone
after the
with
break,
your
and it was because I didn't finish my water.
No, I said,
Later.
that's why I'm afraid to drink water, because then it's back again.
I'll just go down.
Yeah.
I get to really read, I like to be a little fast, so you can answer questions.
No, he's great. He's funny,
Yeah, he keeps it.
he keeps it going, then he just gets in his little, little.
He almost like.
Ben?
What, I hate you?
Sorry?
Where I hate you?
Oh, it could be.
He showed me so many
That's
videos.
residence, like Lister, it may not be where he lives. Yeah, I mean, if you have one home.
I have to try to go there, of course, I just have to sit in this class. No, bad enough I have to drive down for hours.
I just want to make sure I'm done, please, I don't want to walk out.
Oh, fast
I
forward,
want
I
to, yeah, I don't want to do it.
But still, it's required. It's a test. It's a test, all the time. I'm gonna be like the pilot, you know, when things go wrong, I'm just gonna be so cool, you know.
It's a
That's what it's boiling down to, I can't afford to be.
Working with them after, you learn so much and you have to, you know, like going to one of these places and they keep throwing all day, like, all the shit, you gotta figure yourself.
Where do you know? Where do you know?
French. With the accent.
I love Jamaican food and Haitian, like Caribbean food, I love French.
My cousin from the.
Cuban food.
Yeah,
My cousin from the.
yeah.
He knows how to cook.
Me?
He knows how to cook.
So
Does he
my,
know,
I,
he knows how to
there
cook,
was
your
a,
husband?
I don't know,
My
Jamaican?
she's
husband?
still here, she's the
Oh,
one.
yeah.
Oh, your ex-husband.
She's the one that told me about it. Yeah, that's what I said, you know, I can't.
Well, my fiance know how to
Then,
cook.
They can,
that's what I want to do.
Teach me how to
Better
cook.
work on it.
Before I got here,
Somebody
Real.
teach you.
Real.
I was on the phone for an hour and 10 minutes
But I have.
with
friends from all
AT&T
over.
getting a credit process.
Mhm.
Colombia,
When I was so upset when I came in, now I have this major headache.
Oh,
I
I
can't
am.
afford to get upset over anything. Even that. I went to Bermuda and I called them and arranged $10 a day so that they didn't have long roaming. They put it on my other phone. I didn't know that. They put it on, I got two phones. So when I got back, my bill was like $1,800.
Now you're getting all the stuff.
And it covered 2 militaries, so they could only credit the first one. That took 45 minutes. Then this one was supposed to be quick, and I called the day to pay my bill, and it was still $12.
I'll just be happy.
So it took 5 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes.
Being up for 5.
And the last one, it was like a comma. I said, what am I on TV or something? It's this girl with this real voice. And I was already so annoyed. She's being so nice and her voice was and I wanted to get in here, and I don't know if I'm gonna get in here, I can't hang out. You rather have it? No, I can't. And that's what I mean, no fault of your own.
He did.
And then you spend all this time, and then we don't want to do about it.
2 months, huh?
I don't want to be like that.
Oh, well, in that
Let's
case.
just say, anything you don't know what's called.
You know who was at that convention was,
You watch so much stuff.
Oh, what did you say last night, what?
Sully was his.
Oh, you talking about the, they were excited.
Oh.
But-
Because I know, like, I know a lot of people.
I know a lot of people there.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes.
They didn't sign up.
No?
One came with me when.
Oh, yeah, so he did Miracle. No. So the answer just. You gotta know what the heck you're doing. There is no such thing as a miracle. You're expected to perform.
Some of them were older.
I don't know.
You're not sure it's going to stay.
The same mind all the town. It's born and all comes together. Oh, that's nice with that.
Don't forget what he says, you know, none of this is gonna make sense.
It's true.
He said, don't forget what he said, none of this stuff, if it makes sense to you, you're crazy.
Yeah. Because there's so much to digest.
A lot of it's just like every other, like how many people read through a contract? If you did, it would drive you nuts.
Well, yeah. In the ocean, forget it.
But you know, in this business, you have to.
And he had long gliders, I mean, he knew how to do it, but he couldn't have done it, he could have done it on a lake or a river, not an ocean.
Make sure
Too much
what he says.
Too much volatility there, you know?
Real estate agent points out certain things in the contract.
Yeah.
Make sure you understand.
That's true. Because I had it for a condo a couple of years ago. My agent was like, oh, I'm not good.
This is amazing, because there's so much
Oh,
content.
okay.
Yeah, you don't realize it.
I get it, that's what that is. You gotta be able to think.
Something so long, you just can't sit there.
And like, if this is.
Then when you get to the condo, then you have the whole.
And see, now
This
this
guy,
guy, this guy,
you know, up the country, and you're like, I am definitely not gonna read that out, and then I go along. Jumping neighbors will tell me.
Now he's in a catch-22, he can't go.
Especially man,
Go say the guy that was doing, because he was doing the wrong thing.
This is my long sleeve.
Oh, over there.
What's your name? Tracy.
to
I
you
thought
guys
I
now.
was send that to my neighbors on Canadian.
Born, now I'm not.
We're all going,
Saturday.
be back in October.
Then I just comes in so that I can start making my own hours for each year.
A lot of different
Longer, because we want to do
They have one side, and like, regular service. Yeah. Other side, crazy people. I got family and friends over there, so I know. That's what they
That's so hard.
Anybody, I know my family and friends over there. I was caught in the back.
So now, you sell it? You don't.
It's a 55 and 50.
You have to, it has to be.
It's a girl, very quiet, very safe, secure. Besides the regular guys, we have a private.
I get it, I understand. Evil everywhere. Even innocent. This is the best thing.
But I already, she doesn't want something, she wants it, she'll be like, takes out a throws it.
I can go
If she's
check my
on
mail, I can go sit by the pool, I can leave my door open.
behind her,
Come back.
she doesn't want to sleep, she'll like,
Not a problem.
she sits up. It's crazy.
And I call it like,
I can't entertain her anymore.
I've had a 3-2 cash. And I was so blessed because the place came from
Yeah, not so very, very long.
I think everything.
In an environment where the cost of
What I do is eat my clothes and then when I change the car. I'm worried about it. I like colors, you know, I like white. Colors like a mustard color, so you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're not practicing right now. I last year.
I did the back, the outfitters. And then I did the back. Club remain.
Yeah, looks good.
So lifetime warranty.
But here's the thing. I
Honestly,
said,
part of the reason that
They fired
now,
teachers
if I'm an officer,
and administrators,
This
and I
is
work
the
with
law.
a handful of them, like, we do
this
this
is not
and
me,
we do
I
it.
don't want to sell
Kind
you.
of connect with
Just
people.
by the
It's
way.
like nice to have both. No, where?
Where?
With sunrise and, that's what it is.
Okay, that's good.
Concept's not the same. He's been doing that for people that really want to do that.
I grew up. See Carter Park? There's a big park here.
Might be a new one. As far as
Are you originally from?
No, I just moved here 5 months ago from Rhode Island.
Okay, guys, let's get back to it.
So doing the flowers.
Hot sunshine state.
We are forced at this. Buffalo.
All right, let's continue. Let's go to page 33. At the bottom of the page, last paragraph.
What page?
33.
Bottom,
Bottom of the page, starting with line 24.
bracket?
Yes. See what that paragraph says? I have another question for you. I know you get nervous. I have a question. I've read the answers. And basically I have to choose between the licensee violated the law or they did. Which way would you answer it? You're not sure which way to go. Which answer would you choose? One answer is the licensee did nothing wrong. The other answer is the licensee violated the law. And it's a scenario where they're dealing with the public.
Violated law.
The law. Violated the law.
They were on the side of the public.
Thank you. If they set up a scenario where somebody's performing one of the 8 services of real estate, you already know the answer to the question before you read the rest of the information. That's the bottom of the page.
That's who?
That's the bottom of the page that you just read. Because there they're talking about, I think they're talking about unlicensed people, right?
Right.
I have a question for you. How would FREC discipline somebody without a license?
They couldn't get a
Without a
license.
license?
They wouldn't be able to get a license.
What can FREC do to someone that's not licensed? Nothing. What did I tell you the first part of the night? We were talking about 475. Who does 475 Part 1 regulate?
Sales associates.
Sales associate means somebody with a sales associate license, a broker, or a real estate. Understand the term broker would also include those business entities that everybody operates under, like LLCs and corporations. That's why a broker without a policy and procedure manual that's followed, is setting themselves up for a disaster. Way too many times. Now, what I love about regulatory law is that it makes no sense, number one. And number two, the page, two pages you're looking at right now, are all the exceptions to 475. So in my mind, they don't make a law for the law, they make a law so they can have exceptions to it. Because more often than not, they're gonna probably ask you about the exceptions than the rules. All right, on page 34 and 35, starting with line 6 through 45, on page 35.
On page 35.
And that translates to both pages.
Five through what?
It's both pages.
Both pages. So bracket on both pages.
Yeah. Rule of thumb, if they're getting paid a commission, which is normally a percentage, or they're getting paid per transaction, requires a license. Neither one of those situations would be an exemption. You'll find that most of these exemptions usually revolve around a salary. For example, one of them's gonna talk about the owner developer. They can hire sales associates and pay them a straight the salary, and they can sell models. Why? Because Mom says it was okay. It's gonna cut you a break here. Let's take a look at what it says. It says a person who performs real estate services for others must be licensed unless specifically exempted by law. The Florida statutes identify specific exceptions from the requirements to be licensed as a real estate broker or sales associate. The exemptions have been organized into 5 groups for study purposes. The 5 groups are, the first one is, okay, the second one,
Exceptions based on period.
bottom of the page,
Salary disability exemption,
next page,
court and legally appointed persons,
what was the key word?
court and legally appointed.
Appointed.
And the last one,
Miscellaneous.
that means that was one where they didn't have a place to put in them. That's what it is. All right. Looking at the detail behind each one, under exempt owners, if I buy and sell my own property, I don't need a license. I need a license if I'm brokering real estate, which means I'm dealing for others for compensation.
Yeah.
You don't need to be here to buy and sell your own property, or to lease your property. Does not require you to have a license. I can hire people as a owner developer, as I said before, pay them a salary. Can't pay them per transaction, can't pay them commission. If you look under the owner's exemption, line 21 where it says partners, if you have, and I'm gonna use different numbers, like if you had, let's say we had 3 people that got together and they each put in 33 1/3% of the investment. One of them, because of their proximity to the property that they own, the other 2 asked the third person if they would take care of getting this property sold. And he said, okay. And he did a really good job. Not me. Is that somebody's phone over there on the table?
Yeah, me,
You? Okay.
we're going on.
No. No, I don't think so. I thought I was, but apparently not. So we decide, the other 2 guys decide to give the third side half of the profits, and they'll split the other half. That'd be okay?
Yeah.
No, they have to receive the same amount that they've invested in, or.
Exactly. Or have elections. And they could get that extra. It would have to be paid through the broker, unless they were a broker. So, be a nice guy, may not be a smart move. Obviously, that explains why they have to make sure when they set up something like this, that they clearly identify the ownership or participation percentages between the partners. Because that isn't established in writing, how can they justify that they're not violating this exemption? The next one down, exemptions based on careers. First is an attorney at law. You understand that attorneys in law in Florida are not exempt, and they're not treated as brokers. However, do attorneys get involved in real estate transactions?
Yes, they do.
Closing. Do they get paid for what their job is?
Yes.
Yeah, based upon the charges that are on the closing statement. It involves a real estate transaction, but they are functioning within their industry. Therefore, their compensation is basically whatever they decide. CPA is kind of the same thing. You're in commercial property, and you're looking at a $20 million office buildings. What's the chances you're gonna have 1, 2, or more accountants going through those books? They're involved in a real estate transaction, they're getting paid for their services, but they would be exempt from having to have a license because they're within the field. They're being regulated, just not by 475. And then, we already know the next one, the state certified and licensed appraiser. Well, wait a minute. How are they exempt from the real estate law? Because they are exempt from the side that is a broker, a sales associate, or school. You know, so if they are, and they are performing one of the 8 services real estate and getting paid for it, but because their licensing, even though it's under 475, is separate from the real estate license, They don't have a real estate license. They have a state certified appraiser's license. And then, of course, the argument is, but they're still doing one of the services of real estate. But because of the separate licensing, they are exempt from the licensing part of it. It says there. The next one is salaried employees. Now, you could have the owner developer here. On the top of page 35, you have employees of apartment communities. The leasing agents in the in these larger residential kinds of communities, they have a leasing office. Because people are in there leasing units. You know, doesn't necessarily have real estate licenses. But if they don't, they have to get paid a salary. They can't get paid per lease. Can't get bonuses. The next one is condominium and cooperative complex managers. Again, where they get what? A salary. In other words, it's part of the duties they have that they're paying for, that they're getting the salary for. But if for each one they did the appraisal, or leased the unit out, for an owner, they can't give me extra money for helping the nice lady in unit 25 to help her lease out her unit. Can do it, but you would have to have a license. Now, understand, to actually do the management of this, that would require you to have a CAM license. CAM, Community Association Manager's License. That means if I'm managing a condominium association, I need a CAM license. If I'm also gonna lease property out for the owners, and I'm getting paid extra for that, I need a real estate license. It's part of the salary I'm being paid to be a property manager there, and may include renting out units for the owners. As long as I don't get something above my salary, I'm good to go. And then the next bullet down talks about salary employees of owner developers. We haven't talked about that 10 times. If I'm working for a owner developer and they pay me a salary and they give me an extra $100 for each closing.
That's no good. It's no good, no.
I don't have a license.
No good.
You need it.
Can't do it.
Why?
Need a license.
Compensation based on a transaction,
Oh,
per.
maybe he said that before somewhere, didn't he? Check. It's a bitch, it's the same concepts keep coming up over and over and over and over again. There are reasons for that. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the apartment communities, are there practices and because I'm sure that they want a number of units to be leased during that month, incentivizing their agents to do so, would that be considered?
And how are they doing that?
Well, that's what I don't know. Like, if it were, I'm assuming it's with either extra money or a free lunch or something, that would be considered in violation, correct? Okay,
And we're coming to that in just a moment.
okay.
The next one is court and legally appointed persons. Well, if I'm court appointed, the judge will tell me what it is I'm supposed to do, and the judge will tell me what I'm getting paid for. 475 has nothing to do with it. Attorney in fact. What's the difference between attorney at law versus attorney in fact?
Power of attorney.
You have to place.
Well, one of them is a member of the bar. Attorney at law is a member of the bar. Attorney in fact
Authorized by
Not
the
right,
president to act in his place.
Substitute.
The person you have.
Not appointed by the
Law of
court, but
attorney.
appointed by another relative.
we don't call ourselves attorneys in fact, we call ourselves what?
Power
Power of attorney.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then miscellaneous. The first one says persons who sell cemetery lots are exempt.
No, the first one's mobile. Sorry.
Did I skip over it? Yes, I skipped over. First one is mobile. So let me ask a question. If I'm working for a mobile home park and I'm getting paid per unit for selling the units,
Selling or renting.
selling.
They're not selling the land, they're selling the unit. Okay.
Let's see, here, it says individuals who rent, not sell, rent,
Right.
in a mobile home park or recreational vehicle park. They're exempt. Persons who sell cemetery lots are exempt, why?
Cemetery lots are not considered real property.
Right. You know, we haven't looked at the definition of real estate, but we've been talking about it for 2 nights. I'll try to remedy that. The next one is dealers. This would probably be more active to business brokers than any other group. Because as a business group, business broker, if I sell a lot of businesses, I'm gonna find myself getting involved with security. Which probably means, besides having a real estate license, I'm also gonna need a Series 7 or whichever one that is. Hotel and motel clerks. We have a problem here. What those front desk clerks are doing is renting or leasing, depending on which way you want to look at it. And they're being compensated.
Well, not them directly.
But they're on a salary, they don't get more money if they lease a.
What if they did? It wouldn't matter because they're not under 475.
Oh.
They're under 500 or something. See, the actual statute that the restaurant and hotel, what it's called, they're regulated by a different statute. That statute would allow them to get extra money for doing a good job or exceeding X number of rentals. You know, whether they rent it by the hour, the night, the week, whatever's appropriate. So what they had to do is they had to make a decision. Were they gonna let 475 regulate them, or were they gonna let this other statute? Well, it made more sense to put it under the other statute. So then they had to make it exempt from 475. So now, only that statute would control their activities. And then, back to your department question or comment, look at line 41. I remember the time when they used to offer their tenants a free month's rent if they brought in a new tenant.
Well, that ain't been
That's not gonna fly today. Now, you have to realize, people, real estate's no different than the law that talks about how you're supposed to conduct yourself in a car. How many of you probably shouldn't have a license based upon the driving you did today? Some of you are lying. Real estate's no different. And the minute you realize that you've done something wrong, is the time to fix it. Public is a lot more tolerant of mistakes or whatever they are if they're addressed quickly. You're fortunate with this company, you've got a number or an email address to get a hold of somebody real quick. We just had a mediation situation over commission down south. And we won. We have a tendency to run a lot of those. And because the structuring and everything of the company and the way they do business. Okay, I think we're good. Again, this 2 pages that are good sources of questions, but they're not a star. But I'd be willing to bet money that you're gonna see questions from here, maybe more than one, as we go down the road. Okay. Let's roll over to chapter 3. Now, I kind of backed off on talking about the relationship between the department and the division and FREC, because that's what you're gonna run into in this chapter. At the bottom of the page, line 14 to the end of the page, starts out talking about the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. The one thing to remember about the department is they don't spend their whole day dealing with real estate. It's one of, I think, 33 or 36 licensing boards. So they kind of oversee all of that licensing. Continue your bracket on the next page down to line 19. Notice with the bullets on the top of 44, it says the legislature believes professions under DB should be regulated when the unregulated practice can harm the public. Look at what the first thing they said. The second one says the public is not adequately protected by other statutes or local ordinances. In other words, they don't want to over-legislate this stuff. It says less restrictive means of regulation are not available. And of course, in today's world, they also have a monetary issue, a budget issue. Because the number of people working in these agencies obviously are increasing daily. They have plenty of people to send out. That's why if you file a complaint, it may be up to a year before the investigator shows up, depending on where you are and the amount of activity. But, you know, there's only 307,000 agents, real estate agents in the state of Florida, so that's not that many people
How
to
many?
keep up with. 300 and some thousand. Looking at the, line 9. Notice how the department is under the executive branch of government. And is governed by chapter 113. The actual statute that gives the department its power is 455. 475 is what gives FREC its power. Because for each one of these, there has to be an agency that can regulate them so that they can function. Now the question is, how does the secretary of the department get its job? Line 15 and 16 are highlighted. It says the chief administrator of the Department of Business and Professional Regulation is the secretary. Now, we know that every state department has a secretary. The Secretary of State is the head of the Department of State. The Secretary of Education is the head of the Education Department. You'll notice that the department secretary is appointed by the governor and is confirmed by the state senate. That sentence as a start. That's lines 15 and 16. And where is the department located? Why? Is that the capital? You know that our capital for this state should be Orlando, not Tallahassee. Because it is geographically the city of the center of the state. Why? Well, you can thank the Spaniards for that. Because when they were exploring and conquering, I like that word conquering. That's bullshit. It's the same difference as stealing. So you realize that in Florida, you live on stolen property. Why? Because the Spaniards stole it from the Indians and then sold it to you. And we're slowly giving it back to the Indians, who are the legitimate owners of it. You know why the Seminole Indians survived? Because most Indians were taken to the reservations. Because every time the soldiers came, they ran into the Everglades. And guess what? At that point in time in history, don't think you're going to find them being willing to go. I would be willing to go in there now. That'd be 200, 300 years ago. It's interesting. A lot of other interesting stories. That's what I said. Working on that book. All right. The department is responsible for all these different agencies. And typically in that case, there are other agencies underneath the department that assist the department. There is a division under the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which shows itself on page 45, last paragraph of the page. It's called the Division of Real Estate. What does the Division of Real Estate deal with?
Functions related to the regulation of general real estate.
Give me a short answer.
Regulating real estate.
Real estate. That's probably why they call it the Division of Real Estate. So I have a feeling that the Division of Real Estate is there to provide administrative support to who? The department or FREC? FREC. Because the Florida Real Estate Commission consists of 7 people. They don't have a staff. Their staff, if you went up there, you would see what looks like staff. But that staff is under the Division of Real Estate and paid by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Because if you go back to the late 70s, when all this changed, there was a point in time where FREC regulated all in real estate activities in the state of Florida. They were located in Orlando. And there were only 4 members at that point. So basically you had 4 brokers regulating an industry. Almost sounds like a dictatorship. Well, we have something called the Sunshine Review laws here, where periodically a law has to be reviewed to make sure that it's still applicable to today's world. Well, they decided that 4 brokers governing all the brokers without anybody governing the 4 of them probably was not in the public's best interest. That's when they split everything up, and that's actually when they also created the Department of Business and Professional Regulation.
Who's they?
Legislature. Because all of these things have to be created through the legislature. If FREC is in Orlando and the department is in Tallahassee, where should the Division of Real Estate be?
Orlando.
What's the Division of Real Estate's function?
To regulate.
No, they're not there to regulate.
Support
They
FREC.
do not regulate.
Support FREC.
I'm sorry.
They support FREC. It's administrative. That's the word you're gonna see about the division. They are the administrative arm for the Division of Real Estate. However, they are employed by the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. So basically, FREC's borrowing them. They don't belong to FREC. They're assigned to FREC by the department. Because we're talking about government, and you're trying to make sense of it. Which means when you call Orlando, I doubt that you're gonna be talking to the commission. I seriously doubt that one of those 7 people is gonna be answering the phone. You might get the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, Division of Real Estate. I've got to call one day, I'm just curious. I don't remember what, because it's changed over the years. I call one. On the next page, 46, they talk about the Florida Real Estate Commission. Let's, on 46, start with line 1, where it says Florida Real Estate Commission. And let's go bracket to the bottom of the page. By the way, the picture you see at the bottom, going from right to left, the lady was still on the commission when we were there. If you go all the way over to the next to the last one, he was still on the commission. I don't think any of the others were. Because, you know, this is not one of these, you're elected forever. How do they become a member?
You must have
Never been in real estate?
a share. 5 years. The house.
I want to know how they're,
Governor subject to confirmation appoints them.
oh, so they're appointed by the governor. Now, think about this. The members of the commission who are under the Department of Business and Professional Regulation get their authority straight from the governor. And the department has nothing to say about who gets appointed, legally. I'm sure politically, maybe. So you can see that some of the power that the commission used to have is still kind of left over. And you'll notice in that first paragraph under the Florida Real Estate Commission, you see the areas that they talk about that they regulate, or all the areas that we've been talking about. Now, the composition and qualifications. 5 of the members must be licensed. 2 of the members must be consumer members. They're there for an obvious reason, to represent the public. And it says at least 1 of the 7 must be 60 years or older. Now, if you live in Florida, you have to ask me why that one's there. You better think again. I wonder what the biggest lobbying group, political group, from a power standpoint, probably 60 mark and up would contain a lot of them. So how many brokers have to be on the commission at any given time?
4.
4. Because the 5th one can be either one or the other. I haven't heard of any sales associates becoming members of the commission.
How does a layperson get it?
Well, number one, because the statute requires that 2 of them be consumer members. And if we want to stick a little politics in this, because if you say the word appointed and you're talking about government, I'm sure that they do, I guess for lack of a better word, a search throughout the state to find people who would blend into the real estate industry and be beneficial to both the commission or the public. On the top of 47, it finishes up the discussion of the composition and how they get there. You'll see they are subject to confirmation by the federal Florida Senate. It says appoints commission members for 4-year staggered terms. In other words, when they first set this up, they didn't have all 7 of them go in for 4 years. They staggered them so that no more than, I believe it's 2, would expire in any given year. And you also can only have 2 consecutive terms. You'll notice also they do not get a salary, but they do get $50 a day for each day they attend the official meetings and for each day they participate in other commission business. Like I said, if you're looking to get rich, it's probably not too much. At the bottom of the page, it says commission's general powers and duties. Let's do this. Highlight line 21, where it says the powers and duties of the Florida Real Estate Commission fall into 3 general areas of responsibility. The first one is right there. Let's highlight lines 22 and 23. Now, on the top of page 48, line 1 through 3, we're talking about the quasi-legislative responsibilities. This is at the top of 48. I'm sorry, yes, top of 48, where it says 2. Yeah, and then 1, 2, 3, which is the first sentence of it. And then on line 14, quasi-judicial. 2 lines there. What is the broadest power that any public official has? It has a name. They are constantly, one particular person I can think of, we won't say names because I don't want to hear it, has used that power a whole lot.
Pardon?
No,
Revocation?
no. He invoked his executive powers. So whether you're the president or whether you're the chairman of the commission, you have the authority to do your job. Now, the question is, what's FREC's job? If this power allows them to do whatever they need to do, that's what an executive power allows, what do they do? Right. And the answer is very easy. They give it, and they can take it away. I brought you into the world, and I can take you out. So don't tell me that Fred and Mom are not good examples of each other. I somehow stumbled into that. I was talking to somebody one day, I've been doing it for a long time, but it works. Because in my mind, it's the same type of relationship. Mama has certain rules. And she doesn't really care whether you agree or understand them. But I guess she probably wants you to understand them. She just doesn't give it if you don't like it. Oh, that's kind of fair.
Understand them well enough to follow.
Mm-hmm. But the other side of that coin is, then we have a responsibility to make sure that Mom does that. There's the department. On the bottom 47, let's back up for a second. You'll notice it talks about the type of things that come underneath of the executive powers. Fostering the education of applicants and licensees, which means they regulate what we have to do as instructors in schools. Adopt a seal, establish fees. The money you paid was established by what they call a rule of FREC. If you went to the rules of the commission, the first rule is the fees. The department doesn't create the fees that you pay. The 475 sets parameters for the fees. But the actual fees are determined by the commissioner. On the top of the next page, you get the second one, which is quasi-legislative. Take out the word quasi, and what are we left with? What can the legislature do? They can make laws. However, FREC doesn't have the power to make laws. However, they do have a legislative power to create rules and regulations to interpret the law. Because it's their job to interpret and administer the law. Well, then they've got to have a tool to do that. Their tool are the rules. And they talked about the rules at the meeting I was at a whole lot more than they talked about 475. Because the rules ultimately establish and narrow down what they'll regulate and not. And in today's world, we'll do that. You'll see there on line 4, it says they create rules and regulations. For what purpose? For administering law. And when I keep saying the law, what law? I keep talking about the law. Which law? 475. In case you can't remember that, look at the little gray boxes you've seen on just about every page. I saw a hand somewhere. Yes, sir.
So, who can make the change on the amendment? Would it be the governor, or?
What do you mean by amendment?
The legislature. Who can make an amendment?
An amendment? To what?
To 475.
Legislature. By a request of the commission to the department. And the department obviously is the next step up. See, even when they make a rule, it has to go through a process and be reviewed before they can implement the rule. See, that's the checks and balances you talk about in government. In some places they work well, in other places they don't. The third and final one is quasi-judicial. Take off the word quasi and you have judicial. Yeah. FREC can give it. FREC can take it away. Can you be put in jail for violating 475?
No.
Yes, because most violations are misdemeanors of the second degree. There's one that's a first degree, and there's another one that's third degree. That's a felony. So, and we know that in misdemeanors, they're not long-term imprisonment, but it is there. So, my question is, can a licensee be imprisoned for violating 475?
Yes.
I didn't ask you about FREC, did I? I point blank asked you, can a licensee be imprisoned for violating 475?
Yes.
If I had said, can FREC imprison the licensee for violating 475, the answer is no. We can take your license away, we can slap you on the wrist, we can hit you with a citation, we can make you take more education. But we can't put you in jail. Who can? State Attorney's Office. Because when FREC finds something that would be beyond their scope, in investigating a licensee because, let's see, drugs involved, they'll turn them over to the state attorney's office. Well, actually, not even 475, because that probably is not a violation of 475. Because you know, when you have situations like that where people violate the law, they don't necessarily, it's not necessarily just one law, it could be two or three. And, well, yeah, well, they don't have much toleration for drugs and stuff, anyhow, obviously. Now, one more paragraph, or actually sentence to highlight on 48, line 26. It says FREC may not impose imprisonment as a felon. Not saying that they can't be imprisoned, it's saying that FREC can't. That has a start. Yeah, that sentence on line 26 has you highlighted as a start. I think that's my signal. Everybody, put your name on the attendance?
Yes.
Okay, I need you to do one more thing. Requires you getting up and stepping behind the chair and push. All right.